So today I'm going to talk about pickles and fermentation. I have a little bit of history in here, but most of this is about method and reasoning, and why we do all of these things and how we do them. A little bit about me first. I'm a home chef. I have a blog about home cooking called Unselling Convenience, and I absolutely hate food waste. I will go out of my way to really try to really cut down on throwing away anything if I can avoid it, and preserving things for as long as I can. So the first thing I want to talk about is about food preservation. Food-related microbes that will cause spoilage have a range profile that they require in order to thrive. There are 5 common factors, and if any of those things are outside of the range that those food spoilage microbes like, then they won't grow or they'll die. Those 5 factors are acidity, temperature, oxygen, salt, and hydration. And there are interrelationships between those things, but it's really, if you want to stop food from spoiling, you have to adjust one of those things at least. Most common food preservation and safety measures revolve around one of those factors. That's canning, sterilization, fermentation, dehydration, refrigeration, vacuum packing. All of these are changing one or more of those conditions. Pickles. So pickles, formally a pickle is a vegetable preserved in an acid. You may hear the term brine. That is technically salt water, and we'll get into that. But pickle brine is typically an acidic liquid which is used to preserve the vegetable. The acid firms up the cellular structure, and the acidic environment prevents pathogenic growth so that the vegetables don't spoil. Why do Jews love pickles? It's a great question.
Yeah.
And I did a little bit of research into this. I'm actually not an expert in the history of this, but number one, as far as I can tell, is they're delicious. They're really just they're fun to eat, and they're healthy, and they provide essential vitamins and nutrients. They're cheap. They last a long time, so they're very popular in places where there are no or limited refrigeration. They're kosher, but really, the kosher salt is not strictly kosher related. It's for koshering leftover from curing briskets. And food vendors who dealt with cured meats had salt, which they were able to use for fermentation.
Is that like the association between pickles and deli then?
Yes, I think so. But also because they taste really good together.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's all of them.
And when you brought this up, I did look up, and in the shtetls, without the refrigeration, they were looking for ways to preserve all foods.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons that it seems to had become somewhat cultural in a sense, because they're really looking for the preservative.
Yes, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but cucumbers spoil really fast. They do not last. They're harvested, you can eat them right away. Typically they last a couple of weeks, especially if you don't have good refrigeration. They start to get moldy, they start to break down, they're very high water content, and they preserve really well as pickles. Also, historically, vinegar was very expensive, but salt was cheap. Although someone needs to tell that to Diamond Crystal lately, because it's out of control. Pickles were popularized by Jewish food merchants on the Lower East Side in the early 1900s. There was actually a commercial pickle district, and pickles were sold out of stores and push carts. In the 1920s, there were more than 80 pickle vendors on the Lower East Side. Only a few of them still exist. Gus's Pickles is one of them, and the Pickle Guys are an offshoot of that. They're both really good. So technically, you can make a pickle by dunking vegetables in an acidic solution, which is usually vinegar, and then letting them sit to absorb the acid. And that causes a transformation in the vegetable structure. If you're pressed for time, you can do what's called a quick pickle or a quickle. You can do that in a hot acid, or you can actually do vacuum pickling, which uses pressure to inject the acid into the interior of the vegetable. I have a chamber vac at home, which I love, and I use this fairly frequently for making quick
What
pickles.
is that?
Yeah, what's a chamber?
Chamber vac it's a vacuum sealer. So if you've ever seen like the thing, like the box where they put the meat in the bag and they close it, and it sucks all the air out of the chamber, and then it all releases really quickly, and when it's done, the food is vacuum sealed.
Are you taking questions now?
Yeah.
Okay. So my favorite pickles do not use vinegar.
We'll get there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. But chamber vac, I have a whole thing about chamber vac, which is edge sealers. Like a food saver is a kind of like an edge sealer, which works with a vacuum pump by sucking the air out of the bag directly. You can't really use that for liquids. You can't really use it for pickling in the same way because it doesn't generate enough pressure. But a chamber vac works by evacuating the air from the entire chamber and then letting it all back in. And typically those draw a very, very strong vacuum and are great for quick pickling. Vacuum vinegar pickles aren't going to give you quite the same results, but they're light and nice and they taste good. You can add other flavorings and also add sugar to sweeten them. Sugar for fermented pickles is complicated, we'll get to that. Traditional Jewish flavors for pickles are garlic and dill. So garlic and dill. So I have here these, I'll get into my method for fermented pickles, but these I prepped earlier today. You can also make them spicy. I don't particularly like spicy pickles, so I don't make them. But if that's your taste, then great. You can add chili peppers, you can add jalapenos, you can add habaneros, you can add ghost peppers if you want. I like hot sauce, but I don't usually like hot things with other things. I'm not a big fan of spicy tomato, just
What about peppercorns? Is that a common thing? I just
yes,
see them sitting around.
you can. I mean, if you like that. I mean, peppercorns are very common in cured meats. So like brisket, for corned beef, will have whole peppercorns in it usually. I mean, really, you can kind of throw in whatever flavors you want.
So what about pickling spice? How does that relate to kosher pickles? Because usually you could buy pickling spice.
Yeah, so I mean that's just a combination of spices that are commonly associated with those flavor profiles, and you just add them to your pickles. Typically, you use a pickling spice in combination with vinegar, but you can do them with ferments in some cases. Carrots and radishes are very common pickles in Asian cuisines, usually with added sugar. They do like sweet and sour, pickled radish or pickled carrots, Vietnamese and Korean.
And what about cabbage? Cabbage with sauerkraut and stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Cabbage is, I'll also get to that when we talk about fermentation. I don't really know, I mean, coleslaw is kind of like a vinegary, pickly cabbage dish, but usually people don't do like cabbage vinegar pickles that I know. Although a lot of commercially available sauerkraut is vinegar pickled and not fermented, and I think it's inferior. I really like fermented sauerkraut is great, and I have some on the table.
Yeah, I brought some sauerkraut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I tend to lean towards not
Yeah,
spicy,
spicy,
but you know that's a matter of taste. Some people ferment green beans.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of that. One of my favorite ferments to do is garlic ginger paste, which I use as a base for stir fries usually, and it just lasts forever in the You can also ferment fruits, which is kind of interesting. I've done some like sour plums, and they just give like a nice rounded flavor profile.
Do they taste sweet?
They have a little bit of sweetness left in them, but over like most of the flavor profile is sour.
What about something like watermelon pickle?
Yep. Typically, watermelon pickles are a vinegar pickling. But yeah, I mean it's the same thing. Usually use the watermelon, use the rind, and not the fruit itself because like
It's too wet.
It's too wet. It'll fall apart. I've had some that are okay. It's not my favorite thing. But if you like that, great, do it. So in contrast to pickling, fermentation is the act of creating a favorable environment to culture specific microbes for specific effects. There's some overlap between fermentation and pickling, but not all fermented foods are pickles, and not all pickles are fermented. But fermented pickles are great. They're lovely. Pickling with fermentation is specifically called lactofermentation, where you are culturing lactic acid bacteria, which digest the sugars in the fruit or vegetable and produce lactic acid and some carbon dioxide as byproducts. Lactic acid tastes very, very different from vinegar. So it's a little milder, it's a little sweeter, and it's not quite as sharply acidic. Although it's plenty acidic to be safe. There are plenty of other kinds of fermentation which are not lactofermentation, i.e. beer, soft drinks, other things. Yogurt is another popular lactofermentation. We were talking about making homemade yogurt earlier in this, and I'm a big fan of that, highly recommended. There are a number of good reasons to do your own fermentation. For me, a lot of it is quality. You know, the products that you can get, that you can make, are generally speaking, you can tune them to exactly what you want, and you can ensure that the quality is really good. And they're not actually that hard to make yourself. Typically, fermented pickles take about 3 days, depending. If you like sort of half sour, you can let them go longer on the windowsill, up to probably about 10 days, and then I will typically stick them in the fridge.
And the longer you ferment, the more sour it becomes?
The more sour, yes. So 3 days will give you sort of a moderately sour, and you can kind of taste them and see how they are and let them go for longer. They will continue to ferment in the fridge because they're alive, but much slower. Once you bring them down to fridge temps, they kind of go pretty dormant and they will last a very long time. I've had I've kept jars of pickles and sauerkraut in the fridge for upwards of a year, and they maintain quality. I'll talk about some of the ways that you can also some of the ingredients that I use to promote crispness, because one of the problems that people run into frequently when they're making their own fermented products is they get mushy, and the texture doesn't hold up, and that's not good. So we want to encourage the lactic acid bacteria to grow. Weirdly, and fortunately for us, lactic acid bacteria are very salt tolerant, and pathogenic bacteria are not. So what we're going to do is we put the food into a mild salt solution, which is usually around 2% to 5% by weight. When you do that, none of the bad stuff will survive in that environment, and the lactic acid bacteria will take over the culture. They grow. They're present all around. They're present in the soil. They're present in all of these ingredients. I usually make ferments with cucumbers and vegetables from the farmer's market, which are not irradiated. They're not treated heavily with pesticides. None of that stuff is really good for bacteria either. But I did actually a batch of these with pickles, with cucumbers from West Side Market, Kirby's, and they were fine. So take that as a no. In a fairly short time, they replaced the salt in the brine with lactic acid, and transforming the environment from a salty one where none of the pathogens can grow into an acidic one where none of the pathogens can grow. So it's a very safe process, and that's great. But it's also important to keep air out, which is why we do them in a brine that's covered. This is a fermentation cap that fits a standard wide mouth mason jar. These I really like to use for all kinds of fermentation. They come with this little pump, and they have a one-way valve in the top. So you fill the water up to almost the top, and then you have a little air space in the top, which you want to get out. So that you have a pump, you can kind of just pull the air out a little bit. And then over time, what will happen is the fermenting culture will produce carbon dioxide, which pushes the rest of the air out, and you get a pure carbon dioxide environment in the top of the jar, as long as you keep it closed. That's really good because it will prevent mold and yeast from growing on the top surface. It takes a varying amount of time for different vegetables. Half sour pickles, usually 3 days at room temp to a few days, and then to a few days in the fridge. I like to fridge them for a little while because it kind of makes everything crispier and firms up the vegetable structure. Pretty sour pickles are really like 5 to 10 days at room temperature. Sauerkraut typically takes 6 to 8 weeks. It takes a long time for the cabbage to soften and for it to develop the correct flavors. Fermented pickles strictly are made only with salt and vegetables, and no acid is added at the initial stages. The lactic acid bacteria makes the acid that turns it into the flavor that we want. Fermented pickles also will typically have a little bit of a fizzy mouthfeel, which is from the carbon dioxide. Fermented foods are alive and will continue to get more sour over time, but much slower in the fridge. Leaving them at room temperature for a very long period of time may make them inedible after too much time. Largely that's because we prefer warmer room temperatures now than historically when these practices were coming up, and nobody has root cellars in the city, at least. But like, if you can keep them for a fair amount of time at like a 50 to 60 degree temperature, but I just keep it in the fridge.
I've noticed that, I mean, with sauerkraut, that I kept those in the fridge for too long. For like, I mean, too long was just like a couple weeks, and then it was bad already.
Yeah, if it's not properly submerged, it may grow mold. Typically, like a small amount of surface mold is okay. If it's white, you can kind of just scrape that off. But if it's a lot, it grows roots. You know,
Yeah.
it's better to just throw it away. But yeah, also like the flavors will go off. It may pick up cultures from the environment, or it'll get mushy and just not be pleasant. Salt is very important. Salt isn't salt. Salt crystals vary widely in shape and size, and the actual amount of actual sodium chloride per volume varies between brands. So it's very important, unless you know what salt you're dealing with, you measure by weight. So this is a solution that I prepared. This actually has 3 things in it in addition to water. So this has 23 grams of pickling salt. I use, I think it's Morton's pickling salt, which is fairly fine. It's pretty cheap, and it doesn't have a lot of impurities in it. So it's really just pure sodium chloride, and it's easy to work with. And but if you want to use like Diamond Crystal kosher salt, I wouldn't recommend it because it's super expensive right now. And it's best to keep that kind of salt for other purposes where you you need to measure by feel, or you want better texture. Iodized salt, I would tend to stay away from. The iodine is not great for the ferments, so you want to avoid salt with added iodine. But typically, like any kind of sea salt or most other salts are just fine. Calcium chloride is another salt which you can buy, which I substitute a little bit. You can actually do ferments with pure calcium chloride, but they're a little weird. It's commonly sold under the brand Pickle Crisp. You can buy a big jar of it from Amazon for not much money. And that makes the pickles much, much firmer in structure. If you add calcium chloride, they last. And I also add another thing called wine tannin, which is actually made, I think, out of chestnut shells, which adds like a little puckering mouthfeel to them. Some people will claim that wine tannins will make your pickles crisper. They don't. So, but it's nice that's what the sort of brown thing in here is. And actually, I have some samples if you want to take some and try it for yourself. Because I bought like a big jar of it.
What are the amounts of each thing? So if you're
this jar, which is about a quart of water, this is about a tablespoon and a quarter of pickling salt, which weighs 23 grams. So that's about 2.5%. And then for this, I used 1/8 of a teaspoon of the wine tannin and a half teaspoon of pickle crisp. Pickle crisp, which is calcium. So this I just prepared because I'm going to put it in here. What I like to do when you prepare these pickles have been I'm pre-soaked. I actually have an article that I'll put a link to, which is like a complete end-to-end method for doing this. But basically what I do is I trim the ends. So here I have a couple of them. I love this tool. This is actually a tomato corer, and you basically just kind of twist, and it pulls out a little wedge. Right. So it's important. You want to get the stem out. I just do both ends for.
So for those store-bought pickles, often they have the stems in them. They haven't taken anything out. So what's going on there? Is that not necessarily fermenting, but pickling, and therefore that's not necessary? Or?
Yeah, you can, but sometimes the stem can harbor a fungus that will make your pickles mushy. My guess is the commercial ones are probably pre-sterilized, and so they don't need to worry about that. So, yeah, I mean, it's really easy. Just kind of bring it in and twist and get this little wedge. These also, the ones that were in here, I soaked for about an hour in ice water. And also calcium chloride in the soaking step. It kind of gets it to take up the water. And then pretty much you just you can layer this in. You can stuff it in the jar. You can I usually put some in the bottom first. It doesn't really matter. As much dill as you like, and a couple of cloves of garlic. Westside Market sells peeled garlic. And this stuff is great. I use this. I really love fresh garlic, but I really hate peeling garlic. And then that's it. You just want to cover it with this. I don't know if I'm going to have quite enough. Yeah, it should be pretty close. Okay. I would mix up a little bit more for this, and I'll do that at home. Sit. You can kind of just make sure everything is submerged. You really want the water level to be above the top of it. And then you just close it up. Here, I would evacuate a little bit of the air. And then just let that sit on the windowsill for 3 days.
Just 3 to 6 days.
Yeah, depending on how sour.
And that's fermenting.
Yeah,
So, because I missed it a little bit earlier, maybe I wasn't here clear. Pickling
yes.
as a difference.
Pickling is preserving vegetables in acid.
So, and it's for a much shorter amount of time than it.
Yes, if you're using acid directly, it doesn't take very long because the acid just works directly on the vegetables.
Okay.
If you're fermenting, what you're doing is encouraging the growth of bacteria that will produce that acid that you want, and that takes a while.
So when we're buying pickles, when you're buying a jar of kosher dill pickles, are you getting fermented pickles or are you getting pickled pickles?
It depends. They may have been fermented at one point. If you're going to a shop that sells pickles, like Gus's Pickles or Pickle Guys, and you see like the big vats,
Yeah.
those are probably fermented pickles. If you're buying a jar, they're usually not fermented. You can can pickles, but doing so kills the cultures. So canning is not the same as fermentation.
And my lack of knowledge of the taste difference. Can you taste the difference between a
You
pickle?
can absolutely taste the difference between a vinegar pickle and a fermented pickle.
And
I can't. I don't like vinegar pickles at all, and I like the other kind.
so I don't even know the difference. I mean, I'm sure I would know it if I tasted it.
If you taste it, you'd know.
Right.
And
Yeah, I should have brought some vinegar.
Like, how would you know by tasting?
Vinegar,
Very distinctive taste.
vinegar tastes. It tastes like a salad dressing.
yeah,
It's sharper.
You know, I got some.
I wonder, like, when we taste,
from Zabars, and like the first day I ate them, they were good, and then I left them in the refrigerator for like 2 or 3 days, and then they were
Wow.
that had gotten so sour that I thought maybe
those might have
something
been
was
vinegar.
wrong.
Pickle. Now, the difference between a refrigerated pickle and a shelf-stable pickle.
Yes.
I mean,
So
the shelf-stable ones are cooked, right?
yeah. So like when you buy a jar of pickles that's on the refrigerator shelf and it doesn't have to be refrigerated, that is a sterilized pickle. I actually also do a lot of canning, so I can talk about that a little bit. There are really 2 kinds of canning that you can do. There's pressure canning and there's boiling water canning. Boiling water canning is only usable for high acid foods. Pickles are high acid foods. So if you want to can them, you can do that in just boiling water. It will kill, if they're vinegar pickles, it won't do anything to them, although boiling can affect the texture a little bit. So not all varieties of pickles will really hold up well to canning. It kind of depends on what kinds of cucumbers you've used. I haven't even talked about kinds of cucumbers. Let me take that down. When I do pickles, I always use kernels. They're very difficult to find in supermarkets. They have them at West Side Market, usually. They often have them at the farmer's market.
And that's the pickles you have.
Yeah, that's what.
Like so, they're distinctive, like thick.
Yeah, they have a thicker skin, but not as thick as like an English cucumber. But they have a very. You know what? Since I haven't let this sit for too long, I want to cut one of these up, and you can see what the texture of it is like.
Big seeds in there.
I mean, it seems like just by looking at it, very similar to like the pickles that I find in the kosher pickles that I buy. Is that like a normal pickling pickle, or is that
Yes.
the one that people use?
Yeah.
Mostly? Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Right. They're pretty firm on the inside. They have like a lot of structure to them, and they're crunchy. These are actually my favorite pickles to just eat. The favorite cucumbers to just eat. There are really 4 kinds of cucumbers that are commonly available here. There are what are called pole cucumbers, which is like a cucumber. That's like very watery inside, very, very thick skin. That's like what you get when you, that's the default. They're my least favorite. You can also get English cucumbers, which are the long, thin ones that are usually wrapped in plastic. They have fairly thin skins, but they also have a lot of flavor. They're not great for pickling. There are also Persian cucumbers, which are the small ones, usually sold in packs of like 5 to 10. They also have very thin skin and a lot of flavor. Those are my second choice. Israeli pickles, I think.
They use those a lot.
Yeah, are commonly used for pickling. And curries.
Those are the ones that when I go to the nursery, because I grow pickles, like in the summertime.
Cucumbers.
I grow cucumbers.
If you're growing pickles, you're a
Amazing, right? They're amazing.
They'll write you
When I
on the
grow
journal.
cucumbers, I just don't know what type of cucumber that is. Because you just
I
get
guess
a,
we need to get more specific.
you get a cucumber, you get the little budding plant, and you plant it. And
We
they're
just
very,
tell you a
they're
variety.
very long, though. They usually are.
But
big
if you read
size.
the nursery, it would say a variety of
I would
it.
guess it's probably a pole cucumber or an English cucumber.
Which isn't typically used for pickling.
They do end up looking like pickles.
But they could be curries.
You know what I mean? Those, they
It's
have like a
possible.
little, they're short.
Right.
Like I would ask the guy at the nursery if he knows what varieties they
Are
are.
these
They make good
pickles
cucumbers.
more
Oh, yeah,
expensive? Is there any? Is it different? Is there a difference in price between the various types?
The cucumbers?
Yeah, cucumbers.
No.
No, they're all
Not really.
All
I mean, they're-
fairly cheap.
yeah.
Okay, there's not like special cultivation for the cucumbers.
No, I don't think so. It's just they're not they can be difficult to find.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that because they lack flavor? Like, why is
No, I think it's because they don't ship them.
Makes sense.
They don't they're not optimized for a global food chain.
But I do see them at the farmer's market.
Yeah, the
Yes,
farmer's
the
market.
farmer's
I've
market,
found them in Asian
yeah.
markets too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like I've gotten them at H Mart, and I've gotten them at
Yeah.
Asian markets, but not so
I
much.
don't know
in
if I've ever seen them at H Mart, but
Oh, I've gotten
that
them.
doesn't surprise me.
Because that's, I just buy them all the time, but not the regular supermarket though, that's hard.
Yeah, they have them at West Side Market, but not always. Also, cucumbers are a very seasonal thing, so like you're a couple of weeks away from being able to find them at the farmer's market. Probably mid-June is when they'll start showing up, until usually October or something, first frost.
Yes. Cucumbers. I was concerned when we had the date because it's a little early to get
Yeah,
the right cucumbers.
yeah. So these are from West Side Market. Yeah, generally fermentation, just as a note, is a very safe practice. Like, these things are well known, they've been done for thousands of years. And if something smells or looks off, don't eat it. But getting sick from homemade fermented food that looks and smells good is very rare.
Doesn't it help with digestion?
Absolutely. Yes. Lactic acid bacteria are very good for gut health. You can drink pickle juice. But not this, because this is. But if you want to drink some of the pickle juice that I brought, you're welcome to do that.
It's actually interesting. I like regular sauerkraut. I can't eat a lot of them, but that there's this particular brand of firekraut that I can eat like loads of it, and my stomach loves it. I think they're
Yeah.
Do you like spicy food generally?
yeah.
Yeah, see, that's, yeah.
That's about it. That's what I have. Any
Okay.
questions? I'm happy to talk about other things if you want.
Thank you. You have
Yeah.
this taste
Where do you
test.
get the cat?
These I get from Amazon.
Okay, so
Where
you
else?
go in, I know, so when you go into Zabar's upstairs.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen them at Zabar's. You can buy the mason jars at Zabar's. But actually, when I make pickles, I usually use a gallon jar. They don't make mason jars in a gallon size. This is half a gallon. So I have a valve top that I've adapted to fit a gallon jar, which I didn't lug down here because it's big.
So you have to buy the cap and the pump separately, or you get them?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, so this is called I think the brand is Easy Fermenter, but I'll find the link for it. And they sell a kit which has like I think 3 lids and a pump and a couple of also glass weights that you can use to put on top for weighting things down.
So I found that when I'm shopping for pickles, when there are only like 2 brands that I really like, but the vinegar pickles are really cheap and the non-vinegar pickles are really expensive.
Yeah, that's time, really.
It's because it takes more time.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, because vinegar pickles they can make in an afternoon and can them and they're done, and they don't have to sit in a warehouse aging.
Yeah. And so it's just so that's why it's 3 times more expensive.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Makes a lot of sense.
Do you pickle fish or anything like that?
Do I pickle fish? I don't really, but I do like pickled herring. I don't. So that's an interesting thing. Like a lot of that stuff, pickled herring, I think is a vinegar ferment. Is a vinegar pickle usually.
And what do you gefilte fish is lactic?
No, I don't think so.
No, the filter fish is just like ground up. And
Yeah.
It's
Cooked.
aspic.
You see there, it's in some sort of brine.
No, that's more like an aspic. It's like a gelatin.
Yeah.
It's a
like a
gelatin.
gel.
Oh, okay.
Because
fer-
it's, yeah.
Fermented fish is typically, like a fish sauce or Worcestershire, or that kind of branch of fermentation. Because I don't think fish kind of breaks down over long periods of time, and I don't know if you can really get, except in some specific circumstances where like you have like pickled shark fin or something. But I think in most cases, if you try to ferment fish, you're going to end up with goop, and which may taste great, but it's not going to be fish.